back. Well, this new ad campaign causing a lot of chatter, isn't it? Some have slammed it as weak and ineffective just hours after it was launched. Let's have a listen. This is the one that's running in Sydney. We didn't have a picture there of it. It's the woman, a young woman in a hospital bed gasping for air. We'll discuss that now. Panels coming on. Host of the Friday show, Rita Panahi, and also the Melbourne Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, John Roskam. I thought I had a grab there to show people John, but essentially it's a woman, a young woman. Of course, she's not eligible for a vaccine, so it's a scary ad, negative ad. I don't mind a bit of negative. That's not necessarily what I'd run with. The other ones, the arm and the jab and all of that. What do you make of it?
As a consumer, Peter, I share the view that it's unnecessarily terrifying to consumers. As Rita has spoken about, it's not optimistic, it's not hopeful, it's not representative of the sorts of people who suffer of COVID. And I'm not sure whether it is achieving any of the aims it's set out to do. And it just seems to be another example of how we've suffered through mixed messages, unclear messages, and sometimes outright untruths.
Yeah, Rita, in political advertising, this is like a political ad. You can have hope or you can have terror. What do you think?
Well, yeah, we've definitely gone down the scaremongering path. Countries as diverse as France to New Zealand to Singapore have chosen a different path. They've sold the message that get the jab and you can get your old life back, you can get your freedoms restored. And we've gone with this. And it's, to me, bizarre on a number of levels. One, that they're saying COVID can affect anybody. Of course it can, we know that. But we also know that it's a virus that disproportionately impacts the very old and the very ill. So to have a young woman at the centre of the ad who, as you mentioned, is not in a category where she can get the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, if she wanted to. And we only had, a week and a half ago, the Queensland Chief Health Officer come out and say people under 40 shouldn't be getting the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was, I thought, an insane message in itself. So we're getting some very muddled, mixed messaging from our public health bureaucrats. And this ad, I think, is doing entirely the wrong thing. We've already got a nation that is scared silly, that is misinformed about this virus, and I think this ad just adds to that misinformation and adds to the fear.
Yeah, I think people get vaccinated without a scary ad. They'll get vaccinated if it's nice and easy and they can get their choice of vaccine. I think that's why it's got to be in pharmacies and everywhere else, 24/7, vaccination clinics, all of that's got to happen. That's more important to me, I think, than a scary ad. Let's have a look. We've talked a lot tonight about the economic impact of COVID, this lockdown on Sydney. We've got reports out to lay bare how bad it was for Victoria. According to Deloitte, the CBD won't return to its pre-COVID levels in Melbourne until late 2024. And economic activity has more than halved from some $75 billion in 2019 to around $35 billion last year. John, yes, Sydney is really important, but they're 20-odd days into their lockdown. Victoria's all up, so at 160 days of lockdown, terrible lockdowns. I don't see a plan from the Victorian government yet, nor one from the Melbourne City Council.
Oh, Peter, that's right. The plans you get from the Victorian government here are to blame everyone but themselves. It is to ask for more taxpayers' money from other parts of Australia. Whether it's the ad we were just talking about, whether it's the economic and social devastation being caused in Melbourne and now being caused in Sydney, for most Australians, we are simply asking, as you've just said, what's the plan? And the plan just seems to be more borrowing from our grandchildren, no way to live with the virus, and no way to get our lives back to normal. For many Australians, including me, the only thing more scary than that ad we've seen from the federal government is health officials and soldiers telling us we're not going to get our lives back, if ever. Now, no Australian wants to live like that, and I think that's what the premiers should be talking about.
Yeah, I tell you what would motivate me is an ad with the budget ready and get the budget papers there front and centre to tell people exactly how much this is going to cost us for generations to come. Rita, what did you make about this? I know you're a bit of a rev head. The Australian Grand Prix, we know last week was cancelled, was due to be here in November. Daniel Andrews was out on the weekend. He opened a $25 million gay, lesbian, transgender centre now in inner city Melbourne in St Kilda. And at this event, he announced, forget the Grand Prix, you won't have that, but we will have a gay pride event, midsummer, I think they call it, or something of that ilk, December the 5th. It'll take the place of the Grand Prix, he said. What did you make of that? Oh, $2 million it'll cost you too as taxpayers. $2 million, the largest gay pride party Victoria's ever seen.
Well, I don't mind having this party, but the Grand Prix is a fairly important event. It showcases Melbourne to potential tourists around the world, for one, when we do eventually open our borders and rejoin the rest of the world. So that was an enormous blow to cancel an event that was scheduled for mid to late November now, because the teams weren't going to be willing to quarantine, and we just seem determined to continue on the path that we are going to be by November, I think, so divorced from the rest of the world, us and New Zealand, and the rest of the world's going to be probably very close to back to normal by November. And I fear what will become of this country in November. Will we be reaching those vaccine milestones to reopen the country, or we're still going to be talking about some sort of a roadmap? It's frightening to contemplate that.
All right, I want to quickly go to this issue in Cuba. Thousands of Cubans have taken to the street opposing the country's communist regime. The communist regime has been there for some time, but they've never seen these sorts of scenes. Very significant anti-government protests, the worst we've seen since or the best, depending on your view, since 1994. John, what's going to happen here?
We don't know. I'm clearly of the best school, and it seems that in Cuba they're willing to take risks and fight for freedom in a way that many Australians aren't. Cuba is volatile. The challenge will be that you don't necessarily see any support from the Biden administration for this. If it had been Trump as president, there would have been many more people out of the streets in Havana, and you might see some change, but you might see the Biden administration washing its hands of this in the same way as the Obama administration failed when we saw these sorts of protests in the Middle East a number of years ago.
Yeah, Rita?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm absolutely with John here. The Biden White House put out some just bizarre messaging suggesting that this was all over the COVID vaccine and it was connected to the pandemic, when the protesters were yelling to bring down the Communist Party. They're saying Cuba doesn't belong to you. They were yelling pro-freedom slogans, and they were waving American flags, and yet the American government, who should be standing behind them and backing them, was mischaracterising what they were actually protesting. I like to see that as a massive betrayal. And we've seen in Hong Kong the pro-freedom protesters wave American flags. We're seeing it now in Cuba, and yet the Americans themselves, not all of them, but there's a significant portion of them, don't seem to value what America means to those oppressed parts of the world. So I really do hope that something comes of this, and that there's change in Cuba after decades of communist rule.
Yeah, look, any march to bring down communism is a good march as far as I'm concerned. Rita Pan here, John Roskam, thank you for your time.